No, some brothers came the first time and they had a question. Would you mind?
Yeah, a couple questions. It's already gotten late, but we'll have 15 minutes of questions if they're interested.
You asked. But if we can show it, the Shaykh did this introduction.
Well, for an introduction, I'm afraid I have to rest on my laurels. I'll let Hamid give all the introductions to the material that we've been discussing. He has some tapes that people can listen to. We've been talking basically about, for the past 3 days, this is the third of a 3-day, I guess the best term for it would be called a siyaha, meaning a trip. The old Sufis used to travel through the desert without any provisions, and they would term it a siyaha. But we'll call this a siyaha, inshallah, because so many people came from so many places in order to hear something about the tariq. And we talked about it in a general sense earlier today, the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَوَسُولُكَ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَسُولُكَ إِلَى الْعِلْمِ بِهِ. Your reaching Allah is reaching the knowledge of Him. Otherwise, when was Allah ever apart from us? That we should need to reach Him by by traversing a distance. I know. Basically, we talked about, talked about aspects of the tariq, and one of the most important ones is realizing one's slavehood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we talked about today. And this is, just a parting note. We don't have time to really cast a backward glance of all the things we talked about, but I wanted to remind myself and you all, inshallah, tonight, that one of the most important things about the tariq is, if you haven't guessed by now, is love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of the faults, all of the destructive propensities inside the human soul can be the cure for them. People are asking, well, what is the cure for this and what is the cure for that? And the real cure is to reattach the heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked a little bit about the way to do this. And in other words, if you want to do something significant in this path, then fall in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's my advice. How? By using the bridge to it, which is what? It is gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm enjoining myself, reminding myself and everyone who hears these words, that we always have to give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to thank Him. If you can walk across the room and put your feet in your shoes and walk outside the door, you should thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's given you the strength to walk. When you get to be an old man, you won't find it so easy to walk. Okay, all of the blessings that we have, if we try to count all the blessings we have, we can't count all of them. So this gratitude, showing gratitude towards Allah, is the bridge to reaching love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you're thanking Allah, not the enemy of the friend of the person in the spiritual path, is consistent spiritual effort, which is the kind of spiritual works that Allah loves best. Doing things day after day after day after day after day. The enemy of a person doing such things is, aside from laziness, is rote. The fact that these things may become routine. Okay. The trick is to turn all of one's habits into ibadah. Okay. You head out the door to work each day. You don't think twice about it because why? It's a habit. Okay. The trick is to change it into an act of worship. To intend before you go out the door to serve the Muslims. To intend before you go out the door to save your family from want. To spend upon your wife as is obligatory for you if you have a wife, upon your children to support them. To save yourself from having to ask people for money. All of these are intentions by which ordinary matters, habits, can become high matters. And we mentioned the golden rule of the Sufis, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ مَعَالِي الْأُمُورِ وَيَكْرَهُ سَفَاسِفَهَا. Verily Allah loves high matters, and He dislikes, He detests trivial, paltry, base, vile matters. Okay, so it's a matter of seeking the high things, avoiding the low things. Okay, so the adat, the habits, you merely habit, we're trying to wake ourselves up and intend them for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the majal, that the sphere of the merely permissible becomes less and the sphere of the worship becomes greater. Okay, so we'd have to, in this process, and that's part of it. Another part of it is consistent spiritual effort. What does this mean? It means wirds. It means that after each fard salat, you don't cheat yourself. Why go on cheating yourself, jumping up and running away after you say this? Why not say some of the dhikrs that the Prophet ﷺ has taught us? Don't skip a minute of them, because these minutes will never come back. These minutes will never come back. So don't cheat yourself. Okay, the danger here when you're making dua and when you're expressing your gratitude toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you try to become a Sufi, and the Sufis make dua all the time. If they stick one foot in one shoe, they make dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help them stick the other foot in the other shoe. Okay, this is the spiritual path, to have a heart that is connected with Allah by dua. Okay, don't make just dua with your tongue, rattling off the dua you may have memorized from a hadith or something without even thinking about it. Allah doesn't pay any attention to those kind of duas. Okay, as has come in hadith, it's the Prophet ﷺ. Allah doesn't hear a dua from a qalb lahin, from a heart that is not paying attention to what it's saying. Okay, so rote is the enemy of the person who's trying to attach their heart to Allah. Okay, so we should make our dua not with just our tongue, but with our whole being. Okay, this is dua, let alone dhikr. The dhikr, ahra wa ahra. A fortiori, the dhikr should be with one's whole being. Okay. Allah, Allah. And this in reality is when the Sufis talk about the ihsan, which is their goal, which is their manhaj. And as the Prophet expressed it in the hadith of Muslim that we heard this afternoon, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه, to worship Allah as though you see Him. Okay, how? With the ruh, as though you behold Allah with your ruh. Well, that's strange, I don't behold anything with my ruh. Okay. It's because your ruh hasn't developed yet. And the dhikr is to wake it up. The dhikr is to release this spiritual energy within you, and so your ruh develops and can grow. Okay, it can be augmented by the medicines of the anbiya. Okay, because you're not just a body, and you're not just a body and a mind, but you're a body and a mind and a ruh. Okay, all of these things, and each has its share. If you cut off the sphere of the ruh, what have you got? You've got a diseased civilization. Like what? Like the West. Okay, so we're trying to develop our ruh here. Well, strange, how can the ruh have any knowledge? What are you talking about, the ruh? How can it know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than what the mind knows? Normal knowledge, when you say knowledge, I think X is Y, subject and predicate. Okay, this is mental knowledge. What do I mean, knowledge of the ruh? What do we mean by this strange expression? What can there be beyond the intellect? The answer is that there's a great deal beyond the intellect. Your ruh knows directly and non-thetically that you, for example, are alive. If I say, are you alive? You don't have to check the vital signs and then you say, yes, I agree that I'm alive, the subject and predicate connection works. No. Rather, you know immediately and with complete immediacy and complete surety that you are alive. This is knowledge that your ruh has, okay, without even checking its repertoire of mental subjects and predicates. Okay, similarly, the ruh knows or can know if it is awakened, if it is trained, if it is augmented by the medicines that the Prophet has brought, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at their forefront, the dhikr. If the ruh is awakened, it can know Allah. How? With its entire being. not like X is Y, subject and predicate relation, or any other relations, without relation, in the same way that you know you are alive. And so knowing this is one of the main and most important parts of this tariqah that I've been talking about for the past couple of days here. And the knowledge of Allah changes the behavior of a person. If a person says that they know Allah and none of their behavior has changed for the better, then they're kidding themselves. Okay. So these are some, a very basic, a very sketchy outline of some things. Does that remind you of any questions? No.
Again, why the words that you use rather than the specific things that the Prophet used to say?
Is it a question of either or? Is it?
It seems like one is emphasized as a mandatory thing on a daily basis, and the other ones are sort of also to get around to them, do them. So that's
well, it's a good point, because in all of the people who are in the tariq should make no mistake about this, that if you are the ahd that we take from the people who take the tariq is also to recite the Quran. Okay, it's also to recite the Quran, and it's also to say the dhikrs that are that have come, for example, in the Kitab al-Adhkar. Imam Nawawi has mentioned about 1,250 hadiths or so about the adhkar that the Prophet said. What did the Prophet say when he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came in the house? What did he say when he went out of the house? What did he say when he wore a new garment? What did he say when he was going to the masjid for Salat al-Fajr, etc., etc. So it's not a question of either or, it's a question of both. Okay. While it is noticeable at the same time that the divine names in this play of events that we call phenomenal reality, the divine names have a sphere of influence. Each name has a sphere of influence. All things that exist in a general sense, we know from our aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that all things that exist, these things that appear to us as appearances, are known to Allah in beginningless eternality. They're within the attributes, or they're governed by the attributes, mediated by the attributes of Allah's beginningless eternal knowledge, of His will, which is the will makes takhsis. It tells the will, Allah's will determines when this will appear, what time in history, what night of the week, in what company, on what rug it's sitting, and so forth and so forth. It specifies how it will appear in its relation to other things. And Allah's omnipotent power causes it to come into being, just as He knows it in His knowledge, and has specified it with His will. So everything is between the qudra and irada and ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also, practically speaking, in the world that we see around us, we know that Allah's attributes and Allah's names, there is nothing that exists in the universe that is free of a state that it is in. And there is no state of anything that is free of a connection with one or more of the divine names. Okay, for example, what? For example, someone reaches 45 years old, for example, as an ethnic Muslim, and suddenly they get an Islamic trend, and they decide they better start praying, for example. This is an example of a person who is under the influence of the name of Allah, Al-Khafid, He who lowers, He who abases, He who humiliates. Before this time, when suddenly the situation changed, and he entered into a new sphere of a different divine name, Al-Rafi', if you want, He who raises. He was down with the people, it's a very low and a very base and a very despicable and vile and contemptible condition for a Muslim to leave the prayer, to not be praying. Okay, he manifests what? He's in a state that is connected with Allah's name, Al-Khafid. And suddenly, another name comes in, and yuzahim. It crowds aside the implications of the first name and seizes him, and so, until he starts to think about, well, isn't it about time I woke up? Isn't it about time I got serious about the fact that none of this this big house and this big yacht, and my golf club isn't going to enter the grave with me. And isn't it about time I got serious about this and changed? And so when I enter my grave, I'll have something there. And so he begins to think. And Allah has raised him. After Allah humiliated him with his previous state, Allah raised him up. And so these are not just are not just left to chance, but also a person has a tasabbub. A person has a way of entering the sphere of influence of the divine names, and it is by calling upon Allah through these divine names. Okay, calling upon Allah through these divine names. And this is the reason that we, for example, make dhikr, Ya Latif, for example. And in general, we talked about a concept that is rather fundamental. I think that it's a fiqh concept. We talked about this afternoon when you're talking with the brothers. We're talking about tasawwuf in general and the need for it, and the fact that the Sharia of the Prophet has commanded us to realize not only certain words and certain actions, to do the actions and say the words of the Prophet, to be like to imitate the states of the Prophet ﷺ, such as mercy, such as fear of nothing besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as